All right, happy Friday night there, paranormal peeps. Jason Hewlett here, Paranormal Network Manager, joined by Mr. Sam Sheeran, uh, graphic artist, dark artist, paranormal enthusiast, and researcher. Sam, thanks so much for coming, my friend.
Thank you. How you doing?
I'm doing good. It's Friday. It's been a week. We're ready to get into the weekend, but it doesn't feel like the weekend can begin until we kind of have a little chat about all things high strangeness. And this week's topic, it's the paranormal and popular culture, which I figure you'd be a great guy to bring on to talk about this, given the work that you do and are known for. So how about you just tell people at first, Sam, like what you do and what got you into this, etc.
Well, yeah, thanks for that. Paranormal pop culture. Yeah, I do a lot of book covers and documentary covers, film posters. I basically give the image and the look to what everybody reports. You know, someone sees something strange in the sky, or in a strange swamp or a forest, or in a haunted house, and then I'll take the descriptions and then I'll flesh it out and illustrate it and make it look, hopefully anyway, as believably real as possible. And my work has found its way onto, as I say, book covers and film posters and magazine covers and that kind of thing. So that's really a dream come true in a sense, because it's everything that I'm interested in, and I get to do this as a career, as a a living. That's some people can do it as a hobby, but this is my day job, so I absolutely love it.
And I think that that's the dream for anyone whose passion is sort of like art or entertainment or even the paranormal, to turn that into something you can make a living at and do all day, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, before this, and I still do. I mean, we were just talking before we came on air. I've in the past done album covers for bands, merchandise designs, tour posters, all that kind of thing. And I'll always do the big LP layouts and all of the different pages, and I'll do portraits of the band in certain ways, depending on the album. And that's been a sort of staple income for my career in a sense, along with comic book covers in the comic book industry. I've done stuff for X-Files and things like that. So it all kind of ties in eventually to the unexplained and the supernatural, paranormal, whatever you want to call it. It's really my wheelhouse, where every aspect of where I can throw my work, I've always sort of really enthusiastically kind of thrown myself into it. And now it's just what I do every day. And, what more could I want, really?
And so what, like, to be an artist and do that is one thing. What got you into kind of the paranormal? Like, where did that kind of interest begin for you? I mean, a lot of people, it begins as a kid from
Yeah.
watching something or having something happen to them.
Yeah. I mean, like most people, as you say, it is always from childhood. It's what we've sort of grown up with as kids. And for some people, that's watching scary movies, and that's sort of staying up late night on a Saturday and catching a horror film. And then they sort of fall into the aspect of, oh, this is based on a real thing. And for other people, as you say, it's because something's happened to them and they want to know more about it, or they've, then gone to the library back in those days before the internet,
Mhm.
and they've tried to find a book on it. And again, it was really always difficult as a kid to find books on ghosts or the unexplained, because as much as it wasn't as popular as it is today, there weren't as many books. And so if there was anyone interested, that book was off the shelf, it was gone. So you just have to wait. So it was really hard to find stuff. Instead of, being able to look it up, as I say, every day instantly on your phone, back then you'd have to either go to the place and talk to people, or if you've experienced it yourself, ask the neighbors.
Yeah.
So really, yeah, as a kid, it all sort of spanned from there. I had a few experiences as a child where, looking back, I can't wrap my head around what really happened. And I'm not one of these sort of people that will believe in just anything. I'm very much level-headed and skeptical. I have a very open mind, and that's the best way to be as a skeptic, is to sort of look at everything. You can't just make one decision and say, well, that's it, I don't believe it. That's not a skeptic. A skeptic should look at everything and pull it apart for the reason of needing to know what the truth is. And so from my childhood, being really encouraged by my mum to look into natural history and the sort of the science side of things, and I would always be in natural history museums and galleries as well, really kind of fueled my art and my interest in wildlife. And growing up watching David Attenborough documentaries and things like that, it sort of paved the way into the unexplained, because there's always an aspect of the unexplained and cryptozoology within natural history. Species are, discovered every day. You've always heard that. every
Mhm.
year there's a new monkey that's discovered. Even last week there was in Thailand, a small island. There's I think 200 new species in Thailand alone have just been discovered last month. So that thing really was a sort of a huge part of my childhood growing up, knowing that there are things unexplained and they are real. And then when you sort of push that envelope out and you get older and you get into horror films and rock music and that kind of stuff, and the whole controversial devil worship kind of aspect and trendy culture side of things, um, it really sort of becomes commercialized. And that's, we can kind of, it's a nice segue into this pop culture we're talking about, where these days people are selling entire TV shows based on something that was really just made up online. You have these things called creepy pasta. You must be familiar with that website.
Absolutely.
A whole forum of people they'd hold competitions, a couple of years back, well, a number of years back. And Slenderman was one of them that was invented. It was never a real thing. It sort of blew out of proportion, and people started making their own fan art and their own fictional stories to sort of what do they call it? The fan fiction, obviously. To really give this creature a background as though it were a real thing. And when that happens, and when it's done so well, and now that everybody's so interconnected, you have the best of the best being online coming forward, whether they're a writer or an artist. It makes it all the more believable. And then, of course, when it's read by a few thousand people, it becomes real. And that urban legend is then suddenly, no, this happened. And then it spins off and you get these TV shows where people go out and start investigating it. And those are the ones for me that I found really annoying.
Me too, actually.
I don't find it entertaining at all when people say, "Oh, I saw the rake." No, you didn't, because that was also made up. You may have seen something that fits that description, and I'd like to hear more about that. And I'd love to go and see the place you saw it, get a full description, and maybe we can explain what it was, even if it still is something unexplainable. The things just get exaggerated, and it's really annoying.
Well, and it's kinda like, because that is kind of the modern thing that's happening. They even made, like, a Slenderman movie, you know what I mean? And there's even been articles, like, in I think one of those sites, like Mysterious Universes, that they're saying it's become like this tulpa thing, that people have actually taken this fictional Slenderman and made it into this real thing, which pushes it out of past pop culture and into, like, supposed fact, which I don't really buy into that. I don't know what your thoughts are on something like that, but
Funny one. I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to touch on it, but that is a whole other chapter, isn't it, of this sort of fan fiction in a sense, where you can then twist it into a believable. You get these teenagers getting really, really obsessed with it, and they end up trying to kill their best friend. You probably heard that news story.
the documentary, yeah, that Beware the Slender Man that came out,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, and luckily she survived, but this is just the maddening craziness of it. And there's a spectrum of people across the world. That's not going to affect every child. You don't want to get into the satanic panic where all of a sudden, no, you shouldn't be showing this to anybody, because that was just an isolated case. But what happens is you do get people, as you say, with the tulpa aspect of where enough people think of something, it manifests in its own sort of almost like Marvel Comics universe. It just creates itself and becomes a real living, breathing creature, and then it flies off into the darkness because enough people concentrated on it enough. It became real. And I'm with you on this. I'm not sure if I buy that to a point. Some people said that the Loch Ness monster is an example of the same thing, where if enough people believed in it, all of a sudden a dinosaur will be seen in the loch. And I just don't think that's going to happen. So it's a funny one. The idea of thought power, I do accept. I wouldn't say belief, because again, belief has those dangerous connotations with religion, and again, that's another chapter. It's so convolutedly weird where people will look at it almost like a religion and say, well, yeah, if you believe in your heart enough, you'll see a unicorn in the forest. And you just think, come on, no, hang on, that's not how it works. And if it did, and we could talk about ghost hunting and mediums, if it did, if that was a real thing, I don't think too many people would talk about it, because it would be so special. You'd want to keep that to yourself. You wouldn't want to ruin it or make it not happen again by talking about it.
Exactly.
And I think that happens a lot with the ghost shows. Just to go off on a tangent, where you have and I'm not going to name any shows or any names because I do enjoy watching them. I find them very entertaining, and I think that's the point. Is it is entertainment? It's just television, and so long as people remember that and keep that in mind, then it's just fun to watch. And some of them can be educational to a point. You get a bit of history, and you find out, um, who lived there and when and what happened. Some tragedy, and that aspect of it I find fascinating. But it's when every single week someone gets possessed. Um, is just utterly absurd, because that would be the same as Sir David Attenborough um, sitting every weekend in the Tibetan mountains and getting a snow leopard on camera
Yeah.
every week. It just wouldn't happen, and we know those things are real. So to say every week on certain ghost shows that someone's, oh, I'm not feeling good, bro, and then all of a sudden they're possessed, it's laughable. And I know it's entertainment, and they have to hook it in, and a lot of people do believe it.
They do. That's what surprises me, if I can kind of interject that. There's how many people take and I think as someone who is a paranormal investigator and goes into people's homes and places to investigate it, it makes what I do difficult because you're already fighting because these people quite often watch those shows.
Mm.
Right. And they think that that's what goes on. And you almost kind of have to talk them down to say, no, that it is it's presented as reality TV, but it's not real.
Yeah, that's the other thing. The reality TV is very dangerous because, of course, even with the Osbournes, that was a great show. It was the pioneer of the sort of reality TV aspect that did it really well. But even that is edited, and even that, it has the fun, the music, and the fun side of it is sort of interjected, and it's done very well. There's never a sort of a start to finish in a ghost house where someone's sitting there because nothing would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be boring, and they would lose the show. They probably wouldn't even get past the pilot. So I understand that they always have to have something happening to entertain and engage the viewer, where the commercial comes on and they quickly run and make a coffee, and they don't want to miss it when they come back. That's great because that's how television works, and they want people to get those numbers up. And, oh, did you see last week? And it becomes like a knitting circle, doesn't it, of gossip of, oh, did you see that? And half of that is the ridiculousness of it, where someone will be possessed and they don't feel well and they have to step outside. And as you say, that just doesn't happen. Certainly not every week. I mean, it may happen. I'm not going to poo-poo it all because I don't know. And I think that's also a dangerous side of television is nobody knows. So there's no experts. So when you have these, collections of quote unquote experts on television that will pop up on the screen, and then they'll say, oh, such and such expert in this, or there are none because nothing's been proven. And I think it's dangerous for people to suddenly start following these television icons who really don't have professional backgrounds in anything. A lot of them, they either speak very well, or they're a big geek and they're really enthusiastically interested in it themselves, and maybe they've collected books for decades, and maybe they're just really good looking or whatever. They fit the model for the television, but when it comes down to the actual realism, the reality of hauntings or cryptozoology, anything like that, chasing big hairy ape men in the woods or whatever they are, whether it's an interdimensional alien being or if it's an undiscovered great ape or hominid, we don't know. And to have programs that sort of present it as fact, but they're giving misinformation, that's a dangerous word these days, but when they're giving information to fit the model and the concept of a television show, where, if you remember, the Discovery Channel did this, and I will name them because, they shouldn't have done this. And they since sort of apologized, where they did the mockumentary on mermaids, if you remember that one.
They did, yes.
As we know, scientifically, are not real. Some people would argue and say they've seen them or they believe in the mythology. And of course, the ancient Greeks talked about it, and so on and so on. And so maybe there's some, evidence somewhere. But to present a documentary as a scientific fact and sort of play it out as though this really happened was fascinating entertainment, and it really did dupe a lot of people, a hell of a lot of people. And there are people out there that still believe it. And they followed that up with the Yeti, the Dyatlov Pass
Yep.
incident, and they were trying to make out that it was a Yeti that had attacked these unfortunate hikers that had died. Um, and again, it's, you're stretching the truth for television, and I think that's shameful in a way, because people died, and you're changing their history into something that just simply didn't happen. Now, I wasn't there. Maybe a Yeti walked past and, maybe stole a glove or something. We don't know. We weren't there. But to make a documentary as though this is fact and this is what happened, I think it's shameful. And too many of these programs do that. When you have people like yourself, and much of your listeners and your viewers will probably agree, we watch these things because we're interested in the subject.
Mm-hmm.
If we want entertainment, we'll turn on the Disney Channel and watch a Marvel movie. And those are fantastic. I love them. I love Marvel. But at the same time, if I want to find out about Ogopogo, some lake monster, Native American lore, and that kind of thing, I want to learn about that. I don't need it to be exaggerated truth, or even melded with a different mythology, and so you have this mystery to explain this mystery, and then it becomes this thing. There are a few shows that do that as well. Again, I'm not going to name names because they're entertaining, so I don't want to ruin them for everyone, but there are shows out there that will combine mysteries of the unexplained to explain an unexplained thing to make it the next episode. And it is contrived and it's ridiculous. I would, as I say, not to ramble on again, but I would prefer to learn about something, and you do get documentaries with Jeff Meldrum and things like that. They're great, but they're still sensationalized to a degree, so they have to be really careful.
It's interesting, like Don Smith brings up one here, Arthur C. Clarke's World of Strange Powers, which is a show I watched as a kid. And also like bring it into rerun. I think that was one of the first shows I saw. He had that and Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World back in like the 80s. And they were more informational shows, kind of like what you were talking about, Sam, like wanting something that was more informational than sensationalized. And it was Arthur C. Clarke. So he's kind of knew a thing or two, at least about science and astronomy. What you're talking about too, it's not just the documentaries. It's like when Hollywood puts out like the Conjuring movies, which is inspired by Ed and Lorraine Warren's real cases, that could be questionable depending on who you're talking to, and present them as based on a true story. But their Enfield movie, they weren't even there. And they made a whole 2-hour and 15-minute movie about Ed and Lorraine Warren investigating the Enfield poltergeist. They had nothing to do with it. And I think people believe that again as fact, and they play like the audio recordings that were recorded, by people that had nothing to do with the Warrens. Like I think that kind of really muddies the water in pop culture as well. What do you think?
That's a really great example that you've brought up there. I remember when this was sort of flying around Twitter and people were complaining. And I had a conversation with my friend today, in a sort of related way. I don't want to ruin it for anyone who hasn't seen it, but I've started watching, and I'm not a Star Wars fan particularly per se. It's better than Star Trek, but I like Star Trek. Okay, but I started watching the Book of Boba Fett. I don't want to say what happens, but for those who haven't seen it already, there's a scene that happens that's different from when it was first portrayed. They sort of pick up on a particular moment, but what they've done is they've changed what happens, and they've messed with history. And okay, this is fiction, but and you could argue in the laws of storytelling, it's always going to evolve, and it's always going to sort of grow, and maybe something's exaggerated, maybe something's left out, maybe someone adds a little bit, maybe someone embellishes the truth slightly to make it more interesting or appeal to a different audience. But what they've done with that is me and my girlfriend, our eyes just kind of, and again, I'm not particularly a Star Wars fan, but it irked me. I thought, they can't do that. That's not right. That's just not right. That's not how it happened. They've changed it, So enjoy that if you haven't seen it.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I've watched the show,
Yeah, let's just say what? But the Enfield horror, again, back to that great example you brought up there. I remember that flying around on Twitter. There's an example of storytelling where they've done it again purely to sell a movie, which is a great idea of a franchise. Let's build on that franchise. Let's expand it. But I would have much preferred them maybe have them in some way connected. Like, the film could have started with them writing a letter to someone else that's a fictional character that ties to this other case, and then go into a whole new other group of people, but keep it under the same umbrella. That would have been fine.
Mhm.
Putting them in there, as you say, when they were never there, is again, it's kind of naughty, isn't it? It's not something that, it almost ruins the film from the get go. I almost didn't want to see it. I did watch it, and again, for entertainment purposes, I enjoyed it. It was
Same.
a good film. But it just became a little bit sort of romantically Disneyfied at the end. And I use that word in the most positive sense, but it shouldn't be that way. You're talking about the Enfield horror. The clue's in the name. It shouldn't be a romantic film about a very questionable relationship to begin with.
Mhm. And it was just, yeah, it just took it too far into the realm of not real, but they sold it as real. And I
Yeah,
think that's where I really get stuck. It's like, and they've done that time and time again, and it seems to happen a lot with Ed and Lorraine Warren stuff. Like, The Haunting in Connecticut was based on their stories,
yeah.
one of their stories, and it was heavily changed again. And I
Mm.
think that really, it's dangerous because too many people, because it says true story,
Mhm.
will take it as such. I think that's where in pop culture right now, along with the shows, like the ghost hunting shows that are presented as real, I think that's where it's presenting this false view of what actually goes on. And I think it builds a sense of hysteria in our society about this thing, and it's done to make money.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it makes the work hard for the legitimate people who are interested in researching it and investigating it and talking about it.
Yeah, it does. It ruins it. It kind of, and as you say, there's a sort of it adds a stigma that was never there and was never needed. Um, if you like horror films, that's one thing, and the next person to you, who could be a friend you grew up with at school, uh, as is my case, may not be particularly into horror, but they know you are, and they just appreciate that. But then when all of a sudden a film comes out that's supposed to be really good, and yet they just kind of ruin it, and then your friends telling you about it, and it's not even real, and and then you get annoyed, and then they're like, see, I told you it was rubbish, and it just ruins it for everybody, doesn't it? And the same thing happens with true accounts, where I remember having dinner with a friend here in LA maybe 10 years ago, where they were telling me about the Patterson Gimlin footage, the Bigfoot, out in Bluff Creek way back in 1967, the famous footage of the Bigfoot walking across, and then it turns Patty, as we'll call her. They said, "Oh yeah, didn't that guy confess on his deathbed that that wasn't real and it was fake?" And here you have an example of someone who's heard from the press, shame on them, as they always do. They'll spin a story, and they're the perfect examples. They're the best storytellers, aren't they? The ones that really exaggerate stuff. They'll misquote things. They'll still say some really awful things just to sell a newspaper or a story. And the same happened with the Bigfoot situation, where people get it confused with Loch Ness, whereas the very famous, or the most famous photograph of Loch Ness, which is known as the surgeon's photograph, was eventually admitted that it was a model submarine with a little plastic neck. Well, it's since come out. People get that confused and they say, "Oh, well, they admitted that it was a Bigfoot hoax." That never happened. That's still on the table as a real animal, a real being, hominid, whatever you want to call it, Bigfoot. The footage, that's never been disproven. And so many people say, "Oh, yes, it has. Yes, it has. That guy showed the fake footprints and stuff." No, no, no. That was something else. That was completely something else. But the Loch Ness thing, it's now gone almost full circle, where people are saying, well, the submarine that they claim to have used in 1931, or I think it was, um, didn't exist. It wasn't even in production as a toy, so they couldn't have used that. So people are saying, well, does that mean it was real then? It's like a double bluff. And that's the sort of the magic of the unexplained, and the annoying side of it, I find, is because, on the one hand, you've got people like yourself who will go in, do an investigation into a haunted house, or they'll go under an old abandoned bridge by a railroad because there's claims of babies crying.
Mhm.
We'll go there, and yet when someone will sort of say, "Oh no, that's not true. That was some teenagers playing around." All of a sudden, if that fits in more likely, that becomes the story, and it may not be true. There may be a haunted, floating baby with a blue face, who knows, under a bridge, but you're not going to know because everybody's believing, oh, the teenagers. Yeah, that's definitely true. because it's more likely. It's sad.
It is. Destination X. I'll have to check that show out there. Looking at things like Easter Island and Stonehenge, etc. I haven't seen. Have you
Yeah,
seen that one?
yeah.
Is it good?
It's okay. It's okay. It's not bad. Not
Yeah.
bad. It's touch and goes. I mean, with most shows, you can always find flaws. I'm very critical. I have to be honest.
Which is good. I think, look at it with a critical eye, right? um, I think too now, like especially like with YouTube, etc., and people posting ghost videos to YouTube. And I mean, I run a channel where that's the content we put out,
Mhm.
but we try to take it in a serious look. There's people that take like they do their 30-second TikTok video showing something that's supposed to be a ghost, and I think there's so many hoaxes that way too that it makes it hard if you presented a legitimate video of something like you see, like we were here talking right now, and a spirit manifested through the wall, and it happened because we're doing this live. People would still watch it tomorrow and be like, they faked it. I think you know what I mean? I think it's made everyone very much, the hoax factor's gone up significantly too lately.
And as we were saying earlier about the the talent that's out there now is so interconnectable across the web. You could make a feature film on a tiny budget just by emailing people today and getting a team together. You have all these incredible video editors and animators, and most of them are all at college just having fun. You've got kids who are becoming multimillionaires overnight because they made an NFT in their bedroom.
Yeah.
And it's got to the point now where if you see a UFO, particularly a UFO video, it's really, you really just can't take it on face value anymore. You just sort of have to say, well, I don't know, that could be computer generated because it's that good. And I know my skills. And I'm fairly proficient, I'd like to think. And yet I know there are people out there that are 100-fold and have been doing it way longer than me, who can make people say things that they never said on video, and they just mask the mouth across. You've seen those things. So who knows what they can fake these days with anything? Ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot. It's so up in the air that I think, unfortunately, unless it's live and thousands of people are watching, it's really hard to convince anybody, especially these shows. You'll have these TV shows as well where, and certain ghost shows will do this, where they will have, as the narrator's telling the viewers, the scenario of the place, the history, who supposedly haunts it. They'll have a reenactment of that person in life, and this person was, shot in the face or whatever, and they'll show someone being shot in the face as they're narrating it, and it's all exaggerated, and it's it's kind of cheap effects and whatever, but that's purely for views and purely for shock value and purely for entertainment, and it's unnecessary if it's done well. And that's the other thing, we're going off on a tangent here, but it's everything has to be quick these days, and unfortunately it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because on the one hand, if it's done too quick, it looks cheap, but on the other hand, if it's done too quick, you could do lots of them and swamp all the good stuff. There's an ocean of crap out there. I hate to say it, but there is. And if, as you say, something were to happen now where a pencil was just floating along, no one, as you say, would believe it, because it's just all of a sudden it's like, lucky if they even see it. Maybe you already have a following on TikTok, and maybe you can convince someone who's eating a burger, flipping through their phone, to look at it, but they're not going to do anything about it. And I think that's another aspect of the pop culture and the TVs and the movies that people miss is, as you said at the outset, the unexplained and the paranormal, supernatural, it's never been more popular than before. The internet is just, it's now everywhere in every aspect. It's on the side of Burger King, it's on shoes, it's on hats, it's everywhere. And it's become so staple that you've got kids' TV shows, cartoons, talking about the chupacabra, or they'll mention a really obscure, unexplained creature because it's so common now. And it cheapens it in a way, because you're not having legit investigations, you're not having legitimate zoologists or people who could study it and could find a good answer about it, because nobody cares. They just want the big scary monster on the screen, the haunting girl in a night dress floating through a wall, the UFO that zaps a building. That's all they want. And that's fine. Again, it's entertainment. But if you're like me and yourself, where we really want to find out about actual things, maybe you want to make a documentary about it. Maybe you want to make a feature film biopic about a particular investigator. You're really hard pressed, unless you've got money yourself, to find any studio that would back it. And there are some companies that will do Kickstarters to get their films made, and they do. They get them made, and they're okay. But at the same time, people are sort of going for the value of what's hot and what's popular, and they're not really digging deep enough, for me personally anyway, into finding what the truth is behind certain things. And even if it turns out to be some, just inane nothing, like, oh, it was a bird that had a different color plumage and it's just a mutant for that one thing. Well, that's interesting in itself. It didn't have to be a little tiny dragon.
No. Well, I think of the time when we were on one of Shannon LeGros Patreon things. We spent the afternoon debunking different Bigfoot videos, and it was amazing how many different Bigfoot videos were out there. And I think we thought 95% of them were just staged.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
But they're all out there and they're all getting like millions of views. Like it's interesting.
Yeah, and it's tempting. As an artist myself, I like to see how things are done. I always try and pull them apart, and I always sort of, I'm not instantly poo-pooing anything when I see it. I give it a good look. But as you say, the majority of them is just so blatantly obvious, and yet you have these hundreds of thousands of people going, "Wow, it's real."
Yeah.
It's not. Just look closer,
Yeah.
And that's the other dangerous thing is television itself. People just believe anything they see on television because it's on television. It must be real, and that's just the way it goes. Oh, well, why would they make a TV show if it wasn't real? Why would they waste their money if it wasn't real? People seem to miss the point. And it goes the same with the news stations. You have you sort of your blue and red, your left and right news stations that followed certain different political persuasions, and the viewers of either side will believe both sides for their own sort of interests because that's what they're being fed, when really none of it's real and everybody's the same. So, we're all people. We should all get along, and we're all being played.
I agree.
Yeah.
Exactly. Final thing here, just from one of the people who's watching the question. I think this comes from, what do you guys think of Most Haunted? That's sort of from your original neck of the woods, isn't it? Back in the UK, Sam, a ghost hunting show. Have you ever watched that?
I've watched many, many, many episodes. And I've been to a few of the locations. I actually was just in the UK over Christmas to see my parents and my family, which is really nice because I hadn't seen a few of them for 2 years. So it was really good to catch up with them. And me and my girlfriend went and stayed in the Golden Fleece in York, which was on Most Haunted many years ago. I don't think I even saw that episode though, weirdly enough. But it's a pub in York, and it's supposedly the most haunted pub hotel in the north of England. We didn't see anything. We didn't hear anything. We do have a bunch of audio recordings we've yet to sort of go through with headphones to see if we hear anyone talking to us. We sort of went down whenever everything was closed at night, and we sat in the basement and sort of listened and asked questions, but we didn't see or hear anything, which is kind of disappointing. But
it's part of the course I found most times too.
Yeah.
Go to those places that's supposed to be haunted.
And there you have it. That would be a boring television program, wouldn't it? Sitting in silence with Sam. There you go. But Most Haunted as a TV show, I used to really enjoy it. I mean, I still watch, if it's on TV, if I flick a channel, I'll watch it. I will, because it's entertaining at the end of the day. It is a television show. They do go into more effort in regards to history and the educational side of it than a lot of shows do or did. And Yvette Fielding, who hosts it, I think her daughter's now co-hosting it or has taken the mantle, and she's sort of doing her own investigations with her mom on there. And it's a good show. Again, it's a show, and a lot of it isn't real, and they've been caught out a few times faking things. And unfortunately, that's when you find that out, sorry to ruin it for anyone, but it's really disappointing, isn't it? there was a chap called Derek Acora on there, and he's from Liverpool. Now I'm from Liverpool, and I couldn't stand him. It was embarrassing, and I'll say this publicly: it was embarrassing because he'd get possessed every other week, and it just got ridiculous. And he had these, little panic attacks or whatever, and and he'd do all that business. And I'd just be watching it and be thinking, what are you doing? This is absurd. And it was all for show, it was all for TV. And I remember one of the writers or one of the skeptics that was on the show had set him up at one point and had created an anagram of a name, I believe. And they had fed this information to him so that when he was on the show, he'd psychically say, oh, there's a person and they go by this name. And it was an anagram of Derek Acora fakes stuff or something. And they just basically caught him out at it. And he got all, as anyone would be, he got embarrassed, and he was sort of angry about it, as anyone would be, because he's an entertainer at the end of the day, and that was his job. So you can't hate him that much because that's what he does. But I don't appreciate when people fake things on purpose. I don't appreciate how people are led down a path. And Most Haunted is a great show. I just wish they'd have stuck to the real stuff like they did in the beginning. Or at least I think they did.
Yeah, because it questions everything once you find that. And I know so many, like Paranormal State got called out on it, Ghost Hunters got called. I'll throw out those names because it was made public, right? And I think that just does, again, do damage to the serious people who are really trying to find out the truth.
Exactly.
Sam, thank you so much for joining me tonight. It's been a pleasure having you on, and I'd love for you to come back sometime because I feel we could find lots of different things to talk about and not have any trouble.
Yeah, I just had a mug of coffee. I usually drink tea, but I had a mug of coffee because I thought, well, I want to be awake for this because, yeah, Jason, thanks so much for having me on the show, and thanks for the invite, and let's definitely talk again.
We absolutely will. Everyone else, have yourselves a great evening. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another Friday Live Chat. Until then, stay spooky.